this is Dread, and in today's video topic, we're showcasing my Voidshot Pathfinder, a build reviving the nerfed quiver Void Fletcher. This build has a lot of working parts, so I would heavily suggest actually watching the video if you do want to play it, but I will warn you now with my approach with it, using Abyss stacking, is probably not the play. You could probably go Omni and get significantly more damage than this, but that's just every skill in the entire game pretty much, so it doesn't matter too much. Also as well, this build isn't really like the best build of all time. There are better builds technically, but that's because I wanted to focus on Void Fletcher and actually get the Void shots to do damage and actually assist in our single target, which is the focus of this build. So if this looks a little bit worse than your random Omni Tornado Shot build, that is why. Now, I use this build to farm a lot of Harvest, Expedition, and Bestiary. It has a decent amount of single target, but not enough to take on Uber bosses yet, but that's because I still wanted to be able to have a decent amount of clear speed on the build. This build is a little expensive, as a few of the pieces that I used jump in price recently, so I wouldn't advise playing this. But I do want to show you what I've been working on over the past few days. If you enjoy content like this, I suggest leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel, as it's the best way for you to see more of this. Now, let's talk some details, shall we? So if you don't know about the quiver, Void Fletcher, it is an Elder drop that gives you access to level 20 Voidshot. It's a projectile that shoots out, slows down until it eventually stops, and then explodes. This scales off of extra projectiles as well, as each one you add is another hit as long as your AoE and overlaps are good enough, so it allows you to scale as many projectiles as you want to deal damage. Also as well, it will shoot out a void shot for every projectile of the skill that you're using. If you're using a barrage or barrage support, if you just use something like split shot or something like that without barrage support, it won't actually consume your entire void shot charges, but if you use barrage support or barrage, it will consume all of your void shots. So for single target, we definitely want to be using something like barrage. Now, the second tech we're using Vengeant Cascade. Not to surprise anybody, but this notable is pretty stupid. I'm actually surprised it's not a keystone with how strong it is. This interacts weirdly with Void Shot because the projectile slows as it travels, so it will shoot out beyond your cursor, then come back to your cursor. This is insanely strong as we get to abuse things like Far Shot and Arcing Shot, but it does add a level of skill needed to play the build, as you need to know how far your cursor needs to be to make sure you hit the target properly with all of our void projectiles, because the difference between a lot of damage and not much damage is simply just a few inches on your screen with your cursor. Then the last thing that makes this combo even work is of course Sniper's Mark. So normally, Sniper's Mark won't let projectiles hit the same target, even if they return with Vengeant Cascade. But there's a loophole. Void Shot's damage does not count as a projectile. It is an explosion. And this means that the Void Shot projectiles that split off Sniper's Mark will go out, then come back in and stop and explode. This means it brings our projectile count to 7 to 12 easily, and with the level 21 Sniper's Mark, which we use, and we also use Focal Point, which is from our Forbidden Flesh and Flame, it brings us close to 14 to 15 projectiles with our Void Shot every single time we hit a boss. Now, this isn't enough to make all this work. We then use the long-known combo of Supreme Grandstanding from a Victario Elegant Hubris Jewel. We then summon a large amount of Mirror Arrow clones, which use our quiver. We do this by using a Focus Ballista on, of course, Mirror Arrow, as this will shoot out our mirror arrows as we're shooting, so we can kind of pre-fire the boss and get all of our mirror arrows ready, which works really well against, like, of course, the Conquerors and stuff like that. Now, since your allies will share charges, which includes Void Shot, this means that we get an almost infinite supply of Void Shot charges, which means every time we shoot our frenzies supported with barrage support, it shoots out 7 Void Shots, which then shoot out 14 to 15 projectiles each time, if we're hitting a target that's been Sniper's Marked. So every time we shoot about 105 Void Shots on a singular target. Now, of course, this number can go up and down depending on where you're hitting it, how you're hitting it. Also as well, like, it gets really laggy. And as you can tell in the footage, it is very laggy. Normally, this is a problem, but I'm a fun guy who likes fun. So destroying the servers while also deleting bosses, it's fine. I'm completely fine with that. But I don't want to keep you guys waiting for too long. Let's go in game and showcase the character, shall we? All right, here we are in game with the character, level 100 Pathfinder here. So we're going to talk about how to play the build first because yes, this build has a bit of mechanics. So for general gameplay, you just have a Scourge Arrow. Scourge Arrow is really good for clear. It's mainly because it comes inbuilt with Pierce all targets, which is very important when you're trying to just clear T16s casually, like I usually am. You could use any other bow skill technically, as long as it's probably not Tornado Shot. I just like the feel of Scourge Arrow, and I also like the MTX. You can technically use any bow skill with this setup, as long as you have like an Awakened Added Cold, right? Now, for single target, we of course press X, which is our weapon swap. I have two Lionized Glares here. One is set up with the Scourge Arrow setup for clear, and one is set up with my single target setup. So as you can tell, we have a Mirror Arrow Mirror Arrow setup with Ballista Totem and increased duration, life tap, focus ballista, phantasmal mirror arrow, and then for the sixth link, I have LE weakness, a self-cast. Main reason why I'm self-casting LE weak as we had a lot of socket pressure and it was very hard to shove in that third curse because of course we're using Anathema, right? So of course for single target, I press down three little ballista totems there. And of course, as I shoot, they will shoot out mirror or blink arrows. And as you can tell, if I stand near them, I will never run out of void shots. But if I'm away from them, I will instantly run out of void shots. So that is why it is required. So you got to kind of like get a little funky with it, kind of like this far away. And then of course the void shots will come out, come back in. They'll do the sniper's mark and do all your single target. The blink arrow mirror arrows are really cool as well because they like to taunt enemies. You could eventually get a taunt jewel as well, which will make it so enemies are taunted to, of course, your mirror arrow clones, which is really cool as well. We have Blessed Rebirth. This is very important for the build to function. If we don't have Blessed Rebirth, then that means that our minions will instantly die because we're not scaling their HP at all or anything like that. The reason why we're using Focused Ballista is because normally ballistas, they only attack if there's an enemy nearby. But thankfully with Focused Ballista, we can force our guys to attack and we can essentially set up our guys beforehand, which is really cool. Now for the other links here, we have Hatred, Purity of Elements, Enlighten, and Petrified Blood. The reason why we're using Petrified Blood is because we're a Pathfinder. Pathfinder plus Petrified Blood plus Master Surgeon. This means that we take about 40% of damage over time instead of as a hit, which means we essentially have a little bit more HP than you're seeing here in terms of EHP because of our Life Flask giving us so much EHP for free, right? So that's cool. Then for our chest, we're using for Shadow of the Lightless, Power Charge and Crit, Frenzy, Barrage Support, Life Tap. This makes it so that, of course, we get frenzy charges on single target, and we also get it on our life because we're reserving our mana, get the power charge as well on single target, and that feels pretty good as well. Reason why we're doing that instead of grabbing some kind of like frenzy charge on marked enemy, the problem with that is it's a lot of points, and as you can tell, we're a point-starved tree, so we want as many points as possible. So this actually saved us one passive point, which is a few passive points, which is cool. Then for our gloves here, Mark on Hit, Life Tap, Sniper's Mark. I'm doing Mark on Hit because it makes clear feel better, but technically you could take this off and just self-cast your Sniper's Mark, and that would equal into more projectiles and stuff, but I like my clear better. And of course, Herald of Ice, this is just for clear. You could technically use a Herald of Purity if you wanted more single target for some reason. I'm using Herald of Ice because I like the clear on it. It makes it feel buttery smooth alongside my Scourge Arrow. So that's why I'm using Herald of Ice. But you could use anything else here, technically. And of course, for our boots here, Steel Skin, Life Tap, Phantasmal Blink Arrow for clear. I mean, for a movement skill, you could use like Flame Dash here. You can use anything. I'm just using Blink Arrow because I like it. And then we have a Vol Haste as well. So we have a few slots open specifically. We could take out this Vol Haste eventually and go to a 3-socket Shroud of the Lightless where we do 3 Abyss Jewels eventually. That was the plan eventually, but like I didn't really care. I'm pretty much happy with this character and how it's played out. Now, for our passives, the more important thing specifically is this Thread of Hope. This Thread of Hope allows us to grab Multi-Shot, allows us to grab King of the Hill, Master Fletcher, Primeval Force, and also Quick Step. And eventually, if you could manage to steal a few passive points, one with Nature, Aspect of the Eagle's pretty good. This 3-socket thing can let us get avoid being stunned all the time instead of just some of the time with my Boot Enchant. But this is pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with this Thread of Hope slot. If you didn't need all this, if you didn't need this, the increased cooldown recovery rate, we do require the cooldown recovery rate from here. Otherwise, our focus ballista totems, they won't shoot out as many blink arrows. I mean, as many mirror arrows. So we do want this. So we do have to path towards this to grab King of the Hill here. And then, of course, as well, other things like our cluster jewels here, running large cluster jewels with arcing shot and broadside. Broadside is increased area effect for our void shots so they overlap more often. Arcing shot works really well with this since our projectiles are moving out and coming back, meaning that they essentially always get the most of the buff from arcing shot. So we're using 2 arcing shot clusters. Then, of course, for our medium clusters, we're using Eye to Eye and Repeater. Both of these combined is a lot of increased damage. So as you can tell, what's really cool about these void shots is if you're doing it properly, they're still technically near us, even though the projectile is long shotted, which is cool. It's a pretty good trade-off, being able to get even more increased damage. Then for our other stuff that we're doing, specifically, we're doing an Impossible Escape setup with our Elegant Hubris. I went ahead and got Elegant Hubris with Gemling Training, Brutal Execution, and of course Gemling Training as well. This means all that increased physical is increased in our physical, which is then converted to cold because Voidshot is half cold, half fizz, and then of course we convert the rest of it. And then crit multi is always good. There's a lot of different possibilities with Elegant Hubrises in this spot, so I would just keep an eye out. Use the Path of Building thing to find your perfect, find your perfect jewel. Now, as well, for the rest of the passive stuff here, specifically my Watcher's Eye, I just wanted fizz damage taken from hits as fire or cold or whatever, so that of course we have some physical damage reduction. That was like one problem with the build that I was managed to fix, was get a bunch of physical damage reduction through physical damage hits taken as cold, physical damage taken hits as cold, 10% from here, a bit from our flask, get 50% effect, so that's another like 18% right there. Eventually you could re-roll that and get better. And that's enough to make sure that we don't actually just instantly die to fizz damage, which is cool. Now that's pretty much it for the passives. For the Ascendancy here, the reason why we're a Pathfinder instead of a Deadeye is mainly because we can run a Forbidden Flesh and Flame setup here for focal point for increased effective marks. This gives us more projectiles than if we got a Endless Munitions, which just gives us 2 projectiles. Focal point gives us 3 to 4-ish, and it also increases the damage taken from enemies with Sniper's Mark. So focal point was the way to go. This is insanely expensive right now. You don't need it. I just did it because I wanted to min-max. Now, for our Ascendancy, like I said, we're Pathfinder because we got everything we need from Deadeye, specifically from our Lionized Glare. Our Lionized Glare makes it so that we have Far Shot, which is really cool. So that means we don't need to be a Deadeye, which means we can be a Pathfinder. Pathfinder has a lot of cool stuff. Specifically, Master Surging makes us really tanky with Petrified Blood and stuff. It's a lot of sustain for free. I don't have any leech or life gain on hit or anything, and this is pretty much keeping me alive. We have a flask. We have 100. We have more recovery when used on low life. This is really strong in combination with life recovery, flask effect, like from here as well. So that makes us really tanky. Also, as well, of course, Nature's Adrenaline, gaining charges every 3 seconds. This combined makes it so that we always have 100% uptime on our Taste of Hate and our Diamond Flask. Also, as well as our Life Flask. Our Dying Sun is like 80% uptime or something like that. I checked in PoB, it's very close to that. It's enough to the point where it's worth using a Dying Sun, and this makes up for the projectiles we lost from Endless Munitions. We have exactly 50% increased effect, flask effect from the tree. in from our belt here, which means we get 3 projectiles instead of 2, and we also get a bunch of extra increased area, which not only affects our void shots, it also affects our Herald of Ice, leading to smoother clear. Yeah, Pathfinder is a really strong ascendancy currently. So being able to swap from Deadeye to Pathfinder was a really strong thing to do with this build. And that's pretty much it for our passives and our ascendancy. For our gearing, like I said, I'm using a Lionized Glare. That's mainly so I can get around the fact that we don't need to be a Deadeye. On my Lionized Glare tree, we just have added Fizz, which is really good because this is local Fizz, which then is added to the flat on the bow, then increased with the increased physical, right? And the same thing with the base crit. You could eventually work and get a much better Lionized than me, but that's a lot of expense. So if I would only do that if I was pushing really hard into the build, right? Yeah, this is very close to what you'd want on your Lionized, right? The helmet, this helmet could be better. It could have like, it could be on a better base, but other than that, it's fine. I wanted the mana reservation efficiency, so my build wasn't bricked. The Fizz damage taken is cold on the implicit. So this is a Delve fractured base. In Delve, these can drop. So I would just look up this specific modifier and then fracture. Then I used, of course, Essences of Dread, I think, the ones that give you mana reservation efficiency of skills, which is really strong. Then, of course, I just slapped a bunch of life on it. The energy shield doesn't matter. This is going to resell for a bit because, of course, it's got a lot of life on it. It's pretty good. Now, amulet, pretty shitty amulet. I bought this amulet when I started the character. I haven't taken it off, mainly just because it's had just everything that I wanted. You could do much better than this, but mainly you just need Vengeance Cascade. For the quiver, we have, of course, a Void Fletcher with +1 arrow. This is only needed for single target. For clear, I use a non-corrupted Void Fletcher. This costs me 10 divines. It was very worth it. Definitely picked that up for a cheap price considering Void Fletcher being strong again. So you don't actually need that extra projectile. It's just really nice. And of course, my ring is just simply a Curse on Frostbite ring with some life, some strength, stuff like that. Projectile damage is cool too. And also as well, Anathema. So we get we have 3 power charges, right? Which means we have 3 curses. So the main curses we have is Ellie Weakness. We then have Frostbite on hit. Then we have, of course, Sniper's Mark. One of the biggest problem with like bow builds is like you really want to be using Sniper's Mark for most bow stuff. So it makes it so that you need extra curses in other ways. And since our anoint is stolen by Vengeance Cascade, we can't just anoint Whispers of Doom. So we're using Anathema instead. Eventually you'd want something that's like immune to poison or immune to bleed on this. You can get that as a corruption. That would help a lot. And of course, Trial of the Lightless. Eventually, you want a 3-socket one, but those are pretty pricey right now. You get 3 Abyssal Jewels. You drop, of course, the Wall of Haste there. You get 3 jewels, which is cool. My jewels are pretty okay. Just a bunch of flat damage and global crit multi. I just need the res there. Damage, crit multi, mainly. Those are like the things we want the most. And each one that we get gives us increased life, which is cool. And we also get a bunch of pen, which is cool as well. So we have, I think 7. So it's like 28% pen, which is a lot, which is cool. And of course, gloves here, they're just life, has some fizz conversion, some intelligence. These gloves could be easily replaced. This belt was a pain to craft. You just specifically wanted the flasks applied. You have a 10% increased effect. That's the most important one. But of course, I was trying to go for the reduced flask charges to use as well. And then for our boots, boots are pretty simple. You could do much better than this. I just wanted something to work with the build. The cooldown recovery rate of travel stills is cool so that we get more charges of mirror arrow for our totems. So that we, of course, get more totems, more mirror arrows out, as you can tell, which is cool. And that's pretty much it for the gearing. For the flask, like I said, just the more recovery when using low life, the immunity to bleeding. With this flask, and since it's almost always up, we're actually immune to bleeding, which is cool most of the time. Then, of course, Dying Sun, best in slot, of course, because extra projectiles means more damage with of course, Voidshot. Big Quicksilver Flask, Taste of Hate, because we're actually scaling fizz to cold. So getting that extra fizz to cold during flask effect is cool. And we also take less damage, which is cool because, we don't want to take fizz damage. Then our gigantic diamond flask. This gives us like almost 300% crit or something like that. It's pretty cool. Gives us a lot of damage as well. And that's pretty much it for the character. Totally. I'm probably not going to make another update on this build. I'm happy with where it's at, but I want to move on. This was simply an exercise to see if we could push Voidshot to the limit, which we did. All right. All that being said, this has been Dread. I'll have to go work on the next build.